Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about guidance on board committee chair succession. And joining me is Laurie Benson, who's a board member with First Business Financial Services and is chair of their NomGov committee. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you, TK. Happy to join you.
As I said in the intro, you're the chair of the NomGov committee and play a role in recruiting and appointing committee chairs. And if anybody follows this show, they know that I have always suggested that board committee chairs are the lifeblood of the board. It's where a lot of work has certainly been done in the last couple of years. It seems like a lot of the heavy lifting ends up in the committees. I've also been on my soapbox often talking about if something is important to a particular company, you need to make sure that it's part of a committee charter, because when it's part of a committee charter, you have a board committee chair that is overseeing it, which to me makes a big difference when it's a critical topic. So back to you. So in your role, I assume that along with the chairman and possibly the CEO, you're going through this process, thinking through who can serve as committee chairs as part of the recruiting process. So share with me your thoughts around what you think about when you're both recruiting a new director and thinking about board committee chair succession.
Certainly. Well, I share your views with so much of the work being delegated to the committees via the charters, that it stands to reason that a lot of time and thought should be put into who is leading the work at the committee level. And I think that with the trend of the size of boards consistently being smaller, that adds to both the opportunity and the challenge in identifying candidates, both for planned and for unplanned vacancies. So the first thing I would say is that while every board is different, there are definitely some key considerations. And the first would be that identifying the right chairs starts with getting a diverse board. And as you mentioned, with the chair and NomGov, the chair of the board and NomGov chair, having these conversations, it needs to be built into the recruiting and interviewing process as the first step for the full board. So that pool is a finite pool. And it's important that any board member that's being considered is fully aware that they're going to be asked to serve on one or more board committees, and that we need to have a real forward-thinking, proactive approach to making sure we have the depth of both the skills, the qualifications, experience, and frankly, the interest level of board members who are not only going to agree to serve, but embrace the opportunity and make significant contributions. So starting with that board as a whole and making sure you have that depth is very important. Now, you and I know that every public company board has at least 3 committees that are required, and most have others. But the requirements for those committees, for example, in audit, it requires at least 1 certified financial expert, where the GovNom really has a much broader and range of maybe more general background and competencies that will apply. So all of these are like putting a puzzle together, making sure you have that pipeline, that ready pipeline. So to me, some of the board members may not be aware. They may be an expert in one committee, but not in others. So moving around and attending as observers is a great way to generate interest and get some new talent that may be interested in serving. And lastly, I'd say communicate ongoing. So the conversations with the NomGov chair and the board chair are every month at a minimum. But you got to engage everybody in this process, because people have good ideas. They have different perceptions. And so when you're talking about it on an ongoing basis, when there are openings, then you're more likely to be prepared to get the best person. And the most important objective is get the best possible person to serve in each of those chair roles. And, everything else works then. So this is about leadership and getting the right leader in the right chair for all the right reasons.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that, the one size does not fit all. Every board is different. They have different talent. Then that gives you the flexibility to set it up on what way works best for you. Some of these guidance things are certainly things to think about. And that's a segue into my next section, because I wanted to ask you both about the term and the rotation of chairs. Okay. So in my 25 plus years working on board effectiveness, I've seen what I would consider some pretty bizarre rotation of committee chairs, where they're changing. They have a rotation of everybody going through that had to serve as a chair of a committee. And that to me was a little off the beaten path, knowing that it's going to take time for somebody to be a chair. But what are your thoughts when it comes to both the term and the rotation philosophy as far as you're concerned with board committee chairs?
Well, my view of this has changed over time. Now that I have a much deeper appreciation for all that is asked of the chair and required of the chair. So my short answer would be, don't leave too soon and don't stay too long. If we expand on that thinking, when a chair assumes the role, we need to acknowledge the learning curve. So a full year cycle takes you through all the different responsibilities that are outlined in the charter. But there's a lot of nuances in terms of really finding your crease where you can now run the meetings effectively, engage others, and really do some great work. So I would say, that first year is very much a determinant of creating conditions for success for that chair. A robust orientation sets expectations and creates those conditions for success. So now you get in past that first year, how long should you serve until a transition? Well, I think about what the dynamics in today's boardrooms. And chairs have to constantly be reading, listening, learning, talking to colleagues that serve on other boards to discover best practices. And so in doing so, having conversations with your committee, if you really want to try new ideas, invite new ideas and approaches, this takes a while to get that ecosystem and team moving at the speed of trust. So to do great work. So I would say at a minimum between 3 and 5 years is reasonable. And then there's other factors. For example, if you have bench strength to fill a role, it might be nice to have some overlap. And there's great value in overlap so that knowledge transfer can take place, the contributions can continue, and a new chair can assume the role with a learning curve that is actually, it's reduced in time and accelerated in impact because of that presence. So I think it's important to think about what would be the timing. And for me, I've learned that the one-on-one conversations with the board chair after our board evaluations are just a great place to revisit the committees that everyone's serving on, where the needs are, where their interests are, and have a conversation about what's next, who's best, and invite that conversation and that dialogue. So those all shape and inform our decisions around the time, but clearly 3 to 5 years seems to be that sweet spot where you can really take a look and prepare the future chairs, as well as keep the prior chairs engaged in a way that the committees are well positioned to meet both the privileges and responsibilities of serving in those roles.
Yeah, and I would say to boards, don't make those terms hard and fast, because it gets back to your point that you made earlier, which was an excellent point. The goal here is to really have the best person you can have in that role. And then one of the obligations of the NomGov chair and the chairman of the board is to make sure that there is a bench, make sure that if something happens, it could even be a health situation or whatever, where let's say the audit committee chair or the comp committee chair, which involves certainly a special skill set, whether they wouldn't be available. You don't want to be caught, without a bathing suit when the tide goes out. This is a perfect situation that you need to plan. And that starts, like we said in the very first session, with recruiting, making sure that when you bring people in, you understand who might fit well, and then take the effort to help train them up to possibly be a chair. So, Laurie, we have about a minute left. Any final pieces of advice that you might pass along to, our listeners or people that are involved in the committee chair succession?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to add a thought. And I think it's probably a great way to wrap up would be to think about everything happens through great people. So getting the absolute best people on the board and then filling the committee roles led by chairs is a wonderful way to do the work that you are expected to do and the responsibilities to fulfill as a board member. And I would just say that tap into the potential of the other board members. Everyone has so many different skills to offer and thoughts to contribute, and our collective contributions make all the difference. So it's very rewarding to serve alongside colleagues who are contributing in the boardroom in a way that makes the board more effective and efficient, the organization sustainably successful, and in a way that serves all the stakeholders for the long term. It's some of the finest experiences any of us can have to contribute together.
Well, Laurie, I know you've served on a lot of boards and aren't afraid to take leadership roles, and I appreciate you taking the time to pass along this wisdom to our viewers. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, learn from you, and continued success. Thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you. And that will conclude this episode of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We will be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.